Welcome, everyone. It's really nice to be back to talk more about nutrition. As many of you know, the ones that know me well, I'm pretty obsessed about talking about nutrition and I'm really passionate about it. So I can't wait to do this 5-part series with everyone here, and I'll talk about each of the 5 parts in a second. But today we're really doing a big kind of introduction into nutrition and really kind of taking a step back to go, why is nutrition and gut health so important, and also how to listen to your body, because we have been eating the food that we've been eating and having the same habits that we've had for how many years of our life for most of us. And actually making a lifestyle change is a lot harder sometimes than just taking medications that you get from the doctor and elsewhere and other things. So I really wanted to connect you to why it's important. And then maybe as I'm talking, it would be really good for everyone to think about your reasons why you want to do this. Like, why do you want to feel better? Why do you want to live a healthier life? Do you want to, say, have the energy to run around with your grandchildren or X, Y, and Z? Because I really am a big believer is that when we connect to our bigger why, it really helps provide that background motivation for us making these changes. And sometimes these changes initially are not easy to make, but over time they become a lot easier. So that's what we're doing today. But have a think in mind over the next few weeks about what your big why is. So just a bit about me, because I know some of you know me more than others. I am a functional nutritionist, and I'll come on to what I mean by functional nutritionist in a minute. But I'm here because of a personal journey that I have been on since 2000. I was first diagnosed with an autoimmune condition in around 2006. But I've got an autoimmune condition called ankylosing spondylitis, which is a disease that can attack your spine, and it can lead ultimately to fusion of your spine. And I followed a very conventional method, first of all. And when I was quite young then, so I was first diagnosed when I was about 19 years old, and I took drugs and I did other things and nothing really made a difference. I also found it extremely overwhelming because at that age, I knew no one else that had an autoimmune disease. I didn't really understand what an autoimmune disease was. And I just led my life the best I could but the medications unfortunately weren't doing very much. And at the same time, I was having steroid injections right near in my sacroiliac joints, which join your spine to your pelvis. And it was also affecting my periods and other things. So I kind of had these alarm bells going off, what am I doing? Anyway, just to cut a very long story short, is I was seeing a physiotherapist back in 2012, and this physiotherapist was really confused because every single week my pain seemed to move around to a different place, and no matter what she did, we didn't really seem to make any progress. And so she one day said to me, Charlotte, I just don't know what to do with you anymore, which is really confronting when you think you're a fit 24-year-old and someone tells you that. And she goes, I'd like to see a colleague of mine who's an osteopath. So I went back to work, was a bit overwhelmed by the whole situation, and came back. And I dressed in my gym kit, ready to be examined by this osteopath. I walked in the room and we just sat on these 2 chairs again by this table. And the first thing he asked me was, Charlotte, why do you want to get better? And I had dreams, as many of you know, of playing in a lacrosse World Cup. And I couldn't do that anymore. I couldn't do the things that I really wanted to do. My body was holding me back. But I don't think I realized until that moment how much it really affected me. And I broke down in tears, and it was like this big wall came down. And I was like, I just want to get better so I can live the life that I really want to live. And then he goes, what would you do to get better? And I said, anything. And then he goes, so Charlotte, what do you eat? And I was like, what do you mean, what do you eat? And I go, I eat anything. And he looked at me and goes, how do you feel when you eat anything? And I was like, I feel fine. Realizing probably I don't really have very much connection to how I feel when I eat everything. And I thought I ate a relatively healthy diet, but there was still lots of stuff bought from the supermarket that was processed and everything else. He then asked me how my digestive system was. I went bright red and got really embarrassed. He asked me about how my bedroom was. Do I sleep with an eye mask? How light it is? Do I have sockets in my head? Etc., etc., etc. And he never once looked at my back. And at the very end of the consultation, he goes to me, so Charlotte, I think you are intolerant to gluten. I would like you to remove gluten from your diet. And this was 2012. No one really had a clue what gluten was unless you had celiac disease. So I then had to go and Google what gluten was and figure that out. And he goes, I also want you to drink chicken broth for breakfast. And I was like, what do you mean drink chicken broth? And all I knew was my mum made stock on the stove, had no idea again how to make it. You couldn't buy it. And so off I went to research how to make chicken stock. My grandmother bought me a Le Creuset dish. I now realize that chicken stock is amazing for the healing abilities it has for your gut. But at that stage, I just honestly had no idea. Anyway, those two changes changed my life. And I say at the start, were the start of the rest of my life living with my autoimmune condition and really addressing the factors that are driving the inflammation. And you could see whenever I walked into my osteopath appointment from then on, he used to be able to look at me and go, Charlotte, what have you been eating? I can tell you've been eating something that doesn't agree with you. So as the start of a whole series of lifestyle changes that I've done very slowly over time. And it's also been the start of a change in career for me. And I'm now as a functional nutritionist, and I love helping other people who suffer with autoimmune conditions turn their life around alongside having a conventional approach and taking medications at the same time. And I'm a big believer that you need to do both. So anyway, that's a very short version of my story, but I wanted to share it to make you all relate. And I want to, through this series, really empower you all to start making those changes. I don't mind how fast you make these changes at all. I actually think sometimes the slower the better, because if you make them slowly, it really helps you to build them into your life one by one. And I'm over 10 years now down my journey now, and I'm still going, and it'll be the same with everyone else. We can't just click our fingers and change everything. So just a bit of a disclaimer. This communication contains nutrition and lifestyle advice only. I don't diagnose, prevent, or treat diseases or other medical conditions. So please consult your doctor about diagnosing any of these ailments. And also please respect bioindividuality. We'll talk about this a lot. All nutrition recommendations need to consider your unique circumstances, and there is no one size fits all approach. So this is a whole series of talks. So as I said, today we're going to have a big high level look at nutrition and why it's important. I'll give you brief things to do and take away for homework, for in inverted commas, for the next couple of weeks. And then we're going to really dive into what to eat and how to eat in the next conversation to give you what I want to do is give you a framework of how to eat. I'm not giving you a specific diet, I'm giving you a framework. And then after that, we're going to go beyond the basics of whole food nutrition and talk more about things like blood sugar regulation, the importance of fats, about specific things like the autoimmune paleo protocol, and then also about how to build some of these habits into your life. We'll then talk about digestion, leaky gut, and the microbiome and how this connects to autoimmune. And then the last talk, we're going to talk all about the environment around us. So, for example, what personal care products you use, plastics, everything else, because it all has a big effect. So I know nutrition seems it's not just about what you eat, it's far more, but this is what we're going to do over the next 5 or so talks. So the first thing I like to speak to everyone about is, what is your body telling you? As I shared when I went and saw that osteopath, to be honest, I had no idea. And I realized when I actually started seeing a psychotherapist about 4 years ago now, I realized my head was totally divorced from my body. And our signs and symptoms that our body is telling us are all actually telling us a story. We just need to learn to tune in. And so often, and this is what I did, I lived my life at such a rate and I just wanted to push my body to do this, that, and the other. I wanted to do well in exams and everything else. All of that was done at the expense of listening to my own body. So I really do question now, over the first 18 years of my life, before I got my autoimmune disease diagnosis, what was my body telling me? And then now I see how I feel on a daily basis. I let how I feel guide what foods I eat, what activities I do. And so it's a really important tool for everyone living with an autoimmune condition. And you can find out so much information about how your body is doing. And one thing I want to delve into about this first is, just because something is common, it doesn't mean it is normal. So for example, I'll use PMS as an example. So many people out there have PMS that it's come a bit normalized that before you get your period, you should you get symptoms. But actually, what I want to say is that a lot of these symptoms are a sign of dysregulation, that our body is a bit out of balance. And so, yes, it may be common, but it doesn't mean that in a optimally functioning body, this is going to happen. So signs and symptoms tell you a story that something is not quite right. It can be an early warning sign for something more serious down the track, which is most of us here, if not all, have autoimmune conditions. And so, yes, we have something that is slightly more serious that has happened. But if we learn to listen to these symptoms, it will help us, this hopefully from progressing, getting other things, etc., etc. The other thing I want to say is that we can then become very critical if we're suddenly leaning into our body and going, oh my goodness me, I've got bloating, I've got joint pain, I've got this. We can suddenly just start to have a rather negative relationship with our body, which I also don't think is very healthy. And so what I like to do is, instead of thinking like this about the symptoms, I like to be grateful for it. So for example, I have a sore stomach or I have a bit of bloating, I go, oh, thanks, body. Thanks for telling me that something I ate didn't quite agree with me. Now let's troubleshoot to see what you can do. So I think it's about turning it around. And we want to have a positive relationship with our body rather than a negative relationship with our body. And if we have an autoimmune condition or we're in pain quite a lot of the time, that sometimes can be easier said than done, but something that if you practice with can really help. So I want to talk about something called the functional approach to wellness. And you can also probably call this a foundational approach to wellness. And this is what I mean. This is kind of relates to what I do as a functional nutritionist. So here we have a tree. We have a tree that has all the roots that go into the ground, and the roots go into the ground to pick up water, minerals, nutrients, everything. So it pulls all the things up from the ground. It then obviously grows its trunk, it then grows its leaves. And so in a wellness point of view, what we're saying is that there's all of these things under the ground that are driving our body system. And these are probably put in a more negative way. We have our genetics, and we'll talk more about that later. Infections, we have our digestive system, we have medications that we take, we have things like leaky gut or a positive digestive system, we have genetically modified foods that we have other healthier foods that we have sleep will feed in here, stress, any trauma experiences. And the reason I put big T there and a little t is that we can have the serious life, the kind of the things that we think of as things like trauma, like car crashes, abuse, other things that can be thought of as really big events. But we can also have what we call little t trauma, which is a lot of this can happen in childhood, for example, when your subconscious is developing, when you experience something over and over again, and it can develop these kind of, you wouldn't think of it as trauma, but it's kind of this minor things that are just sitting below the surface. We have things like our oral health, we have our water, our hydration status, our thoughts, our emotions, toxins. And these are all feeding our tree that is then going to grow. And then what happens if these are out of balance? This can lead to a number of symptoms. And I've to try and make it easier to read, I've grouped these symptoms here into different categories. So these are different symptoms that can arise when things in the kind of coming up from the ground are not quite right. So digestive complaints, acid reflux, indigestion, burping, feeling full in the morning, bloating, constipation, irritable bowel, food sensitivities, things that can indicate hormone imbalances, so PMS, irregular periods, PCOS, symptomatic menopause, low libido. Brain-related symptoms, so depression, anxiety, memory loss, brain fog. Immune-related symptoms, allergies, rashes, oral, gut, or other infections, asthma, stuffy nose, other sinus issues. Blood sugar-related symptoms, so weight gain or weight loss, fatigue, insomnia. And then any other symptoms, so joint pain, anemia, chipped fingernails, dark circles under the eyes, muscle pains, bumps on the back of your arms. This list could go on forever, but I wanted to give you a good example. And so when we get these things, these are the things we want to kind of be noticing in our own bodies and our own lives. And these are an indication that the things at the very bottom are not quite right. And so we need to do some more digging as to what that is. So if these over time are not addressed, this is when what we call the more serious conditions or diseases can then arise. So autoimmune conditions, diabetes, heart disease, cancer. And I guess my point is that often these bigger things don't necessarily arise without warning. And also it's not our fault if these things do arise. I also want to make that very, very, very clear. But there are often these early warning signs in our environment that we're just not really taught to listen to. So what is our body asking for? So when we're experiencing symptoms, I think our body is asking for help in recalibrating its whole system to achieve homeostasis again. So homeostasis, I like to think a bit about it like homeostasis is all about how does our body stay within balance. And so if we think about a thermostat in a room, it will kind of heat the room up a bit if it's a bit cold, and then when it gets too hot, it will cool it down again. And the same thing happens in our body. It's a very dynamic process. So instead of using Band-Aids or plasters, whatever you call it, we really want to understand what is driving it and work on the foundations to support the body from the bottom up. And I also want to say is that supporting symptoms, which many medications and things do, is also not a bad thing, because we need to live our life comfortably as well. But I encourage people to work in tandem, so helping support the symptoms, but also help work from the bottom up as well at the same time. So this enables us to strive for optimal health rather than just the absence of disease. So for example, if your diet is not optimal and we work on improving our diet, it's not just going to help that one thing we're having issues with, it'll also help a myriad of other things as well. And I'm a firm believer that our bodies have this innate intelligence. We just really need to give it a chance. So if we give it the right building blocks to work, it knows what to do. We just need to learn to trust it. So I just wanted to dive in also to what we call this triad of autoimmune conditions. And it's a triad of three driving factors that are thought to drive all autoimmune conditions. And this concept was derived by someone called Alessio Fasano, who is a medical doctor, pediatric gastroenterologist and researcher, and he's extremely well renowned, especially in the autoimmune field. And so what he thinks that these three factors, which I'll go into in slightly more detail, are the three things that kind of have to happen. It's kind of known as a three-legged stool. These things all have to be there for an autoimmune disease to develop. And then also, I think it's empowering, because once we have an autoimmune condition as well, we can then think about these things and helping us manage our autoimmune condition as well, and also trying to stop us from getting other autoimmune conditions as well. So these are genetic susceptibility and environmental triggers and increased intestinal permeability. So I'll go into each of these in more detail. So one, genetic susceptibility. So this accounts for approximately 30% of autoimmunity. And this is when we are predisposed to a particular autoimmune condition due to our genetics that we inherited from our mother and our father. Predisposed is the biggest, most important word there, because as it says in the next line, our gene, or I should have already put genes here rather than genetics, our genes can actually be turned on and turned off. And this is kind of the quickly evolving science of epigenetics. So for example, with me, I have a gene called HLA-B27, which indicates that I have a predisposition to ankylosing spondylitis. But what did I do? But we know from what I just said about epigenetics that we can actually turn our genes on and off. And it's interesting because when I was at school, there was something called the Human Genome Project that was happening all around in the world, and everyone thought this was going to be a miracle breakthrough for all of our conditions that we have. What was realized is that they realized that we have a lot less genes than we actually realize. And I can't remember what animal it's compared to, but this is probably completely the wrong animal, but we apparently have less number of genes than a worm or something. Anyway, so the point is that many of the changes to our genes are not because we have different genes turned on and turned off. It's because our environment can turn the genes that we have on or off. And we'll talk more about what these things are in a second. But these changes that happen in our life, we can turn genes on and off that affect us in our lifetime, and they can also be passed on to any future offspring that we have. And things that can be turned on and turn off are environmental factors. So things like the food we eat, the chemicals we're surrounded by, the thoughts we have, the stress, our sleep, our exercise, all of these things can potentially turn our genes on and off based on whether they're good behaviors or bad behaviors. And so I think this is really empowering because we may be predisposed to something, but it doesn't mean we're necessarily going to get it. But again, if you do get something that you're predisposed to, please don't blame yourself. There's a really good quote that says, your genetics load the gun and the environment pulls the trigger, which I think sums this up really, really, really nicely. And I'm not sure if it was derived by Chris Kresser, but it's very heavily used by a functional doctor called Chris Kresser. So the next one is increased intestinal permeability, which in a more colloquial name is called leaky gut. And so if we think of our digestive system, we have the lining of our small intestine, which is where all of our food is absorbed after it's broken down. And normally this is a very highly selectively permeable membrane. So what this means is that it lets into our body things that are helpful, so broken down nutrients, but it keeps out of our body, out of the inside of our body, things like bacteria or toxins or other things that we don't want to let into our bloodstream because they're going to be damaging to our body. So what happens when we have increased intestinal permeability, which it means we have basically a very simple way, we have holes in our gut lining. So things can flow into our body that shouldn't go into our body. This then, when our things pass into our body, before it crosses into the bloodstream, our immune system sits there and it goes, is this thing safe or is this thing not safe? If this thing is not safe, it'll trigger an immune response, which then drives inflammation in the process. And this is what starts causing issues in our body. Because that lining is so important, 80% of our immune system sits in that lining of the small intestine. So when it's holy, our immune system is under a lot more stress than it otherwise would be. And they think that this could lead to things like mistakes and other things in a simplistic form, which then can basically lead to the body's more increased likelihood of getting an autoimmune condition. So as it says here, leaky gut precedes the development of autoimmune conditions. And they've actually done studies to show and looked at everyone with an autoimmune condition, and everyone that they've looked at has actually had a leaky gut, which I think is fascinating. So regardless of whether you have symptoms of digestive symptoms, that is a big sign that work needs to be done on everyone who has an autoimmune condition with their gut. But on the flip side, positively, if we restore the gut lining, we can stop inflammation and give your immune system a break. And then obviously that will, once we want to take the distraction off our gut so our immune system can properly regulate itself and properly manage the rest of our immune system rather than it being under pressure just in the gut. So reasons for increased intestinal permeability, and we'll dive into this more in week 4, but to be honest, everything that we are going to be talking about in this mini course is really going to be helping you support your gut. So reasons for increased intestinal permeability is poor diet and eating highly processed foods, nutrient deficiencies, digestive dysfunction, dysbiosis, which is an imbalance of the bacteria that you have in your gut. The bacteria are extremely important, but they need to be in the right balance. Chemicals in our environment, medications, stress, and lack of sleep. So we won't be talking really about medications and lack of sleep in this context, but we'll talk about everything else. And as Hippocrates said many, 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 many years ago, all disease begins in the gut. And it's quite funny now how we're all coming back to going, oh, how important is the gut? Where they probably knew about this a very long time ago. So the last one in this 3-legged stool is environmental triggers. And that shouldn't say otherwise known as leaky gut. Apologies, that's my fault. So a number of lifestyle and environmental factors can trigger or worsen autoimmunity by disrupting immune function and contributing to chronic inflammation. So if you think about it, we have genetic susceptibility, which is there. In some people, it may not be there. We have the increased intestinal permeability, and then we have an environmental trigger that comes along and then starts this whole autoimmune disease process. So environmental triggers can be nutrient deficiencies, it can be stress, it can be viral and bacterial infections in the gut, mouth, and other, can be in hormonal imbalances or changes. So a lot of autoimmune conditions in women in particular can arise or get worse at times of hormonal change. So when you first get your period, when you at pregnancy or after birth, or when you go through menopause. And then other things like toxins, so pesticides, tap water, chemicals, heavy metals, mold, plastics. And so you see that the environment's about an awful lot more than just toxins. It's about everything that is in our surrounding environment. So kind of with all that in mind, what we're going to really be focusing on in this series is a whole series of what I like to call a foundational approach about the building blocks that we want to get right in our body to have a big effective flow-on effect further up the chain. So for example, when you build a house, if you built a house with really poor quality bricks, the end result is not going to be very good. So it's the same thing here. We want to create really good bricks of your body to really help over time your body to build into a healthier version than it is now. So the things that we're going to be focusing on that I've already touched on is diet, gut health, blood sugar regulation, and healthy fats, which is really important in inflammation management in particular, hydration, and environmental toxins. So finally, I think now we'll start talking about nutrition, but we're going to still talk about it at a very high level version for today. So first of all, why is nutrition so important? And I always like to tell this story about cats. So for those of you wondering about why there are cats on the screen, I'm going to tell a little story that hopefully for those that have heard it before, you'll still enjoy it. I still love telling it. So there was a scientist called Dr. Francis Pottinger, and he worked in a sanitarium and he did experiments on tuberculosis. And he used the adrenal glands, which is the stress gland, from cats for his experiments. And the community got really excited by this experiment. I don't know why. And they started donating loads of cats for the experiment. He fed the initial cats scraps from the sanitarium for their food. And then when he was inundated with cats, he ran out of food. So he had to go and get the rest of the cats raw butcher scraps to feed them on. He suddenly realized that the cats that ate the raw butcher scraps were way healthier than the cats that ate the sanitarium scraps, which then prompted him to do a further experiment on cats and food. So he split cats into 3 different groups. He fed the first group of cats raw milk. He fed the next group of cats pasteurized milk, so milk that had been heated up. And when you heat things up, it denatures the proteins and it changes its structure. He fed the third group of cats pasteurized milk that had been sweetened. So the cats that ate the raw milk were really healthy. And then the cats that ate the pasteurized milk and the pasteurized sweetened milk were even less healthy than the raw milk cats. So even in that first generation, you could see a big difference in the health of the cats based on what they ate. What then happened was that the cats then reproduced and the kittens ate the exact same thing as their mother. The kittens that ate the raw milk were just as healthy as their mother. But the kittens that ate the pasteurized milk were less healthy than their mothers, even though they ate the exact same thing. And the same thing with the pasteurized and sweetened milk kittens, but they were even less healthy than their parents. And so what this really showed, it was the first experiment that really shows that your food that you eat can affect your genetics, and then that's passed on to the next generation, which is why the kittens when they reproduced were a lot worse. Over time, their health deteriorated every generation. So sometimes their faces got narrower, their teeth became really overcrowded, and their fur changed, their bones broke more easily. And after 4 generations, some of the cats became infertile. And then the raw milk kittens were fine every generation, just thriving. But what then they realized was if they substituted back in the raw milk to those kittens that were suffering after eating the pasteurized milk and the pasteurized sweetened milk, that over 4 generations, their health came back to normal. So it just shows you how powerful food is. And if you think about how much, like I went home, I've got a 98-year-old grandfather. He eats brandy and peaches for breakfast. He eats about 1 vegetable a day of that, and it's probably cooked, like, I don't know, for however many minutes. It's probably got no nutrients left. But I like to think that if I ate the same food as my grandfather, I don't think I'd be standing. And it kind of just shows he's 2 generations further up than me. He's 2 generations up towards more whole foods. And I think that's why, so me now, I really feel like I would like kids, and I really feel it's my role in my life to kind of support my genetics to then pass on healthier genes to my kids. So anyway, so that's just showing the bottom point that your food can turn your genes on and off, epigenetics. And then also, this might make you laugh, and hopefully just think about, if you take off all of your clothes and just look at your body when it's naked, everything that you see is made from the food that we eat. I think food is often thought of as fuel. It's not often thought of as the building blocks of our body. But actually, food is needed for every single chemical reaction in our body. It's needed for every single cell in our body, every single tissue, every single system. And in us with an autoimmune condition or anyone, it's needed for our immune system, it's needed for our hormonal system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So how is our body supposed to function well if we're not getting these good building blocks into our body? So as I just said, nutrition, it drives gut health. So if we have a poor diet, it also increases our risk of things like leaky gut and poor digestion. It drives hormonal balance, immune regulation, mental health, and much more. Food in itself can also cause inflammation, and which then inflammation is often thought as one of the drivers of chronic disease, but why do we have that inflammation in the first place? Or food can provide these nutrients for healing. So two very opposite paradigms. And just to note, even if symptoms don't manifest when you eat, they can still be related to what you eat. And I think I didn't have any digestive symptoms when I first started my journey. Yes, I have more digestive symptoms now, but I think I was so numb to how my body actually operated on a daily basis. And it wasn't just my body was in shock, I think. So then what to eat? And we're not going to dive into this really in detail today. I'm just going to talk to you about a framework. I don't want to get into diets and things like that, because as I said before, there is no one size that fits all. But I want to introduce you to what I like to call the real food framework. So I'm all about eating whole foods that are properly prepared, so real foods. So what is whole foods? Whole foods, in my opinion, are real foods that have no ingredient label and that are beneficial rather than inflammatory. And some whole foods can be inflammatory for certain people, but that really comes down to individual circumstances. So we just forget about that part for the moment. But real food has no ingredient label. What do I mean by that? So fruits, vegetables, if you buy celery from the shop, it won't have an ingredient label. If you buy meat, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it's things that are close to source and close to the earth as possible. So meat, fish, good quality vegetables, good quality fruit, grains, pulses for certain people that can tolerate them, good quality fats. It's basically not for things out of the packets with the ingredient labels that go on for the whole page. The next concept is nutrient density over calories. I think, unfortunately, over the last 40, 50 years, we've become very, very, very calorie obsessed. I actually don't know how many calories are in many things, and calories can be important for certain things like weight loss, but generally I'm promoting that you're getting nutrients into your body rather than focusing on calories. And if you follow a nutrient dense approach, your body will tell you when it's full. It will tell you when it needs food. And I think when we learned, if we focus on things that are internal, like calories, that are more external, we forget to focus on how we feel when we have food, which is the most important thing. Our body tells us what we need. We want to focus on the different macronutrients, so eating healthy carbohydrates, fats, and proteins in each meal. We also want to consume a variety to get different micronutrients into our diet. And then again, I'll say it again, we are all different. There is no one single diet or food that works for everyone. We have to learn to listen to our body. So these are the basic things I'm going to be talking around for the next 5 weeks, and we'll talk mostly in the next one about in more detail about what this means. And I want to kind of tell you another story about food and diets. And this is about the findings of Dr. Weston A. Price. So Weston A. Price was a dentist, and he, in the 1930s, I think, realized that over his career, he had seen a massive increase in tooth decay in children and things like overcrowding in the mouth and all sorts of other things. So he retired, and as you do, he went on a trip around the world, and he went to visit lots of tribes in their native conditions in I think Canada and Australia and in the Arctic, and he wanted to see what they ate. And then he wanted to see what they ate versus people that had moved out of the tribal community into kind of the more Western civilization. And what he realized was that in the more native communities, most people were thriving with health. They had really broad, he has this amazing book. If you Google Weston Price, you'll see these amazing, like broad, really wide-faced grins of people with really healthy dental structures. They have really broad faces. They look happy compared to when they move into more kind of civilized environments where their diet gets poorer. their teeth start becoming more crowded as their mouths shrink. They have narrower faces and their health issues start getting worse. So what he then did was he took samples of all of their diets from the different places he visits, and he brought them back and he compared them in his lab. And what he realized was that there is no one size diet that fits all. Everyone ate a very different type of food based on where they were based, but that all diets had what he called inflexible laws of nature. And I apologize for being so much text, but I just think it's very interesting, so I'll read through them. So no diets contained any refined, and this is the people in the kind of the tribal communities. Their diets didn't contain any refined or denatured food. They all consumed animal products, and they all consumed different types of animal products, and most of them would have had organ meats, but all consumed some. So no vegan tribe was found. Some of the meat was eaten raw. The diets contained ×4 the amount of calcium and other minerals, and ×10 the amount of fat-soluble vitamins. So fat-soluble vitamins are vitamins A, D, E, and K that are commonly found in animal fats, and you need fat to absorb them. They include foods high in enzymes. The seeds, grains, and nuts were soaked, sprouted, fermented, or naturally leavened. This makes them more easily digestible. It adds bacteria, adds all sorts of things. The fat content of diets was between 30 and 80% of calories. This obviously depended on from where they were. And with only about 4% from polyunsaturated fats, so omega-6s or 3s, and we'll talk more about polyunsaturated fats next week. So diets contained about equal amounts of omega-3 and omega-6 fats. And so just for context, what's happened now is omega-3s are more anti-inflammatory and omega-6s are more inflammatory. In most diets now, the ratio of omega-6s to 3 is about, it can be maybe 10 times omega-6s to 1 omega-3. So it's very different to modern diets now. Some natural mineralized salt was used, and they used the animal bones usually for broth and sometimes eating the marrow. So I'm a big believer, like in big whole food nutrition, we're kind of trying to go back to emulate a lot of the things that our ancestors did. We're obviously all from different places around the world. So someone from the equator would eat a very different diet to someone that lived in the Arctic. And so that's what we need to think about with bioindividuality. Like, where do you come from? What did our ancestors eat from where we come from, for example? And finally, you can't out-supplement a bad diet. So supplements are great, but if they're, and they are great, they can be great. Some supplements are terrible quality, to be honest. If you get them from just a generic supermarket, supplement companies, like anyone else, want to make money. So they fill it with fillers. They want to make their production line as efficient as possible. And so they can be filled with many things to make the machines run faster that are no good for your health. And they're very good if used in a targeted manner. I use them a lot to support digestion, to support specific deficiencies. But the first priority is supporting the diet. So what next? So first of all, dysfunction has arisen over time, and so it can take time for it to reverse. So our bodies, some of our cells in our body, they live 30 days, some live 90 days. Some cells in our body, they turn over over a really slow amount of time, but they do say every 7 years, our body kind of replaces itself. So I like to say our body heals in layers. So you sometimes deal with one symptom, you deal with that, and then something else arises. And it's a bit like an onion, which is why there's a picture of an onion here. So I think the first message is, let's be patient with what we're doing. And we want to keep on nourishing our bodies with real food and listen to what it's telling you, because this is a real crux to making changes in your diet that are right for you. But awareness is the first step. Awareness is the greatest agent for change. So with that in mind, I have a few things that I would like you to consider over the next few weeks. And the first one is become an ingredient detective. So I talked about the real food framework that I want to talk about, but I want you to start to become empowered to understand about what are you actually eating? Do you know? So I would like you to start when you have food, just become more curious and become more aware about what you're eating. Are you eating things that have no ingredient label in? Or if something comes from a packet, have you actually looked at the ingredient label? Or have you just judged it from the front because it says gluten-free and organic, so it must be healthy, or you just have no idea because you just picked it up because it was easy and that was what your priority is. And there is no judgment here for where anyone is at. For this first stage, I don't want you to do anything necessarily about the ingredient labels now, but I want you to start looking at the ingredient labels of the foods that you currently eat. So if you grab some coconut milk, for example, or some bread, turn it over and have a look what is actually in there. How many ingredients are in there? Do you recognize the ingredients? Are the following included? And I can send these around to Charmaine and she can send it out later. Do we have sugar and sweeteners in there? Things like sugar and sweeteners can often be listed multiple times on an ingredient label, because on an ingredient label, the things that are most prevalent in the product is the higher up. So for example, for companies to make it seem like there is less sugar in there, it will include alternative versions of sugar. It will split it up into different forms to push the different versions further down the list. Other thickeners and emulsifiers, other additives and preservatives, other colors and flavors, even the natural ones. Natural flavor means it can be anything. Does it have highly processed fats and oils such as margarine and vegetable oil and canola oil? And we'll talk more about that next week. And a bonus is, and if this is easier if you're out shopping, the different versions of the same thing, e.g. coconut milk, have different ingredients. So if you're in the store and you need coconut milk, just have a look at the different versions that are in the store, because you'll probably find that some of them have coconut milk and water in them. Others have coconut water, coconut in them, water in them, emulsifiers, preservatives, etc. in them. So within one product, you can get actually very different products if you actually look at the back. So this is the first challenge number one. Challenge number two is, what are you eating and how does food make you feel? And so I want to empower you to learn to make changes based on how your body feels, because it's the most useful tool. So start to become more aware of the foods that you eat and how you feel when you eat these foods. Do you eat whole foods, or does your food come mostly from processed ingredients? Again, no judgment here. We're just trying to raise awareness. What are your eating habits? Do you eat 3 meals a day, or do you graze? What is a variety of food that you eat? Does each meal satisfy you? So how do you feel directly after you eat a meal? How do you feel 1, 2, 3 hours after your meal? Are you eating your arm off, or are you okay? Then what is your body telling you? Do you have digestive issues? Do you get sleep disturbances? Do you get cravings, changes in mood, aches or pains, rashes, runny nose, or other things, or other? And the reason we want to just zoom in and maybe get a journal and write these things down, what do you notice? Because this can be used as your kind of report card over time. As you make changes, you can see how you feel and how you get better. And first of all, as you become more aware, things may become more noticeable, which may feel a bit scary, but it's not. But then you can really monitor over time what happens. And again, bio-individuality, everyone is different. So honor your individual body and symptoms. You may live with someone, they may react fine to one thing and not another, and you may be totally different. And it's the small things you do every day that makes a difference. So this graph is taken out of a book called Atomic Habits by James Clear that I'm actually reading at the moment. And it's all about the 1% better every day. So, and if you make a 1% change over time, it can quickly escalate into really good things in your life. And that's shown as the upper graph here. But if you don't make those 1% improvement over time, you can keep on declining. So there's a real choice of, what do people want to do? Do you want to make one change to your food and implement that consistently for the next 2 weeks? Or are you just happy staying where you are? So that's it from me.